We're not looking at it today, but Babylon was a Christian code name for Rome. So that bit at the end, he's greeting the Christians he's writing to from the church in Rome. Now, you'll need to excuse me. I fell off my bike last Sunday and I didn't tell you because I made it in. I flipping hurt my ribs. And I've done it worse yesterday, so I'm having a bit of trouble breathing. But I'm going to race through this as quickly as I can while in the middle. So, not that quick though. There we go. Humility. I think there's a theme running through this whole section of the letter about humility, and so that's what we're going to think about, and we're going to look at humility in all the different sections that Peter mentions and the different people that he's speaking to. But we have to think about what humility might be. The following has been given to C.S. Lewis. Okay, so he didn't actually say the bit at the end, so I'll show you. So the definition I want to work with is: the essence of gospel humility is not thinking more of myself or thinking less of myself. It's thinking of myself less. Now, apparently, a lot of people said that's C.S. Lewis said that. He didn't say that, but it's been attributed to him all over the internet. So I think Tim Keller said this in summarising what C.S. Lewis said. But what I want to show as well is that here's a motherload of evangelical references. We've got Tim Keller quoting C.S. Lewis. So it's maybe not a surprise to you, but that's me getting all my quotes in the one part of the sermon. All the stuff I'm stealing from others. But if we were to meet a truly humble person, Lewis says, we would never come away from meeting them thinking they were humble. They would not be always telling us that they were a nobody, because a person who keeps saying that they're a nobody is actually self-obsessed. The thing we would remember from meeting a truly gospel humble person is how much they seem to be totally interested in us. Because the essence of gospel humility is not thinking more of myself or thinking less of myself, it's thinking of myself less. Sometimes we waste energy trying to say that we're not good at certain things, or we pretend to be bad at certain things, or we can't give someone a compliment without criticising ourselves and saying, I can't do that. So that's false humility. True humility is too interested in the other person you're talking to bother trying to manipulate how they think of you. So true humility, people who are truly humble might actually say, yeah, I'm actually quite good at that. It's not a very Scottish way to behave, is it? But truly humble people might say, yeah, I'm actually quite good at that thing. They don't waste time trying to cultivate what you think of them, because they're more interested in you, in who you are and what you're interested in. And so that's what I'm thinking of when I speak about humility. He speaks first to the elders. If you are an elder in this church, this is especially for you. If you're not an elder, then this is what you should expect of your leaders. You should expect them to be humble. Peter doesn't actually say the words humble. He says that they should be willing to serve. He says that they shouldn't serve for their own gain. He says that they should not serve grudgingly. So if your elders seem grumpy and fed up, if they always seem like they can't really be bothered with the responsibilities they've got in church, then Peter's speaking to them and to me and us, and he's saying you should expect your elders to be cheerful, to be serving for your sake and not for their own sake. At this church, there's not a huge amount to be gained by being an elder, I would say. So, it might be a stretch to think, you'll be respected in the community, because at Riverside, you probably don't get that much respect for being an elder. You're probably not being an elder for your own gain, because there's very little to be gained. But there are churches where being an elder seems to be something where you get a lot of authority. There are definitely churches where people abuse their authority. There are definitely places where people benefit financially from being in charge. And Peter says to them, That's not the reason. I suppose the most likely thing in Riverside is you might get a grumpy elder. I'm not going to make eye contact with anybody. Okay, you might get a... So if you think that we're not doing our job cheerfully and for the service of Jesus, and if we seem to be doing our job grudgingly as leaders in this church, then maybe don't point it out to us, especially when we're grumpy, but you could pray for us. But that's what you should expect from your leaders. People who humble themselves and serve you. They are not serving for their own gain. They're not serving for their own reputation. They're not in it to boss folk around. They're not in it for the respect. They are in it. They are humbling themselves before Jesus and before you and serving you. That's why I like it when I see the elders hanging back to put the chairs away and hoover. That's why I like it when I see, and they do. I think every elder here you will hopefully find tidying up behind you, cleaning. And that's not to say all the things that they ought to be doing in the background that you don't even see. But that's what you should expect from your elders. You should expect elders to behave like Jesus when he tied a towel around them and began to wash the feet. Like I promised you before, you'll not catch me washing your feet. I hate feet. But I will come and clean your toilet if you want. And that's what you need to expect, that kind of service from your elders. But here's the thing, they could lord it over you. I know it seems a stretch here, but here's something interesting. Isn't it amazing that Peter says to them, I implore you as a fellow elder. Now Peter was an apostle, he was a witness to the resurrection, but he doesn't order them. He writes to the elder, he says, I'm a fellow elder. Now this is the man who a huge chunk of the church believe is the first pope. He's certainly a lead figure in the early church. And he says to the elders across the church, I'm a fellow elder. That's why if you seek to be an elder, it is an honourable thing to seek to do, because it's to stand in the tradition with people like Peter. And so you can see that they might think that they were important. You could see why they might feel that they were it. But their leadership is to be exercised in service and humility. But they should expect humility back. Some of the texts say young men. We don't have loads of young men in this church. But it says young. Some of the texts say young men. Some of the commentators think it might be that the young men were a certain group of people with certain responsibilities. The point is, they were to show respect to their elders. You know that saying about when you were in your teens, you couldn't believe how stupid your dad was, but it's amazing as you've got older how much he's learned. And I think it's easy as a young person, full of passion, full of energy, it's easy to look at older people and think they don't know anything. I spent most of my 20s and early 30s, and that's not that young, is it, but anyway. I spent most of that time angry with everybody that led the church because they were doing such a bad job. It's easy when you're younger to think that you know what everybody else ought to be doing. You know, and we do it ourselves. The internet has just exacerbated that. So we know what the politicians ought to be doing. We know what everybody in leadership ought to be doing. And in the church, it's easy for us to sit there, especially if we don't have responsibility, it's easy for us to sit and think, they don't know what they're doing, they're idiots. And so they're told. Peter says to them, you humble yourselves under them too. They've been given a job to do. They should be serving you, they should be listening to you, they should be respecting you, but you have a role to play. This is a mutual thing where you show respect to them. Do you know the thing that really challenged me was, I used to moan about the church so much, and then someone said to me, well, why don't you do something about it? And why don't you become a leader in the church? Which obviously eventually I did. And then I realised that the idiots that were running things weren't as stupid as I thought they were. Maybe your frustration is a call to do something. I think I said that last week in a different way. But a function of change, a significant part of change is frustration with how things ought to be. So maybe if you feel great frustration, maybe you feel frustration about how this church runs, well, maybe it's time to come and help. If you're really frustrated and you've got lots of criticism, maybe it's time to come and help, to step up. Peter says to the younger people, the passionate people, the people who are desperate for change and think that maybe the elders don't know what they're doing, he says to them, respect their authority because they have a job from Christ. And yet he also says to the elders, you should be serving these people. He finishes it with something you've heard all the way through 1 Peter, that they should submit to one another. So you remember all these groups we've looked at? We've looked at power dynamics all through society. We've looked at the relationship between men and women. We've looked at the relationship between what was masters or slaves, or employers and employees. All through this we've heard, we've looked at the relationship between citizens and governments. And all through we've heard of this idea of mutual submission. Those in authority should be serving those that they, and humbling themselves before those that they have authority over. But Peter says again and again, humble yourselves. But here he says to the elders and the whole congregation, you should humble yourselves and submit to one another. Now, I'm not sure how relevant all of this bit has been. But I know this next part will be relevant. So the leaders have to humble themselves, the whole community is to show humility. I can't work this thing. There we go. Peter tells them that they should all humble themselves before God. And he says it in a really specific way. This is a church which is beginning to be persecuted. We don't think this is in the full throes of persecution, but they're at least made to feel very uncomfortable in their society. We know that they're under a lot of pressure. We know that they're suffering. It will get worse. They don't know that yet. But Peter is preparing them for that, and he says to them that they should humble themselves under God's almighty hand. And God, in time, will lift them up. Meantime, they have to humble themselves, and how are they to do it? They have to do it by handing their anxieties over to God. One of the ways that we show our pride is through our inability to hand control over to God. One of the ways it can be like that false humility at the beginning. So actually, when you continually turn the focus back on you, go, oh, I didn't do very well. Oh, I'm not very good at that. That's really pride. What we really want folks to go is, oh no, you're good. You're really good at that. I'll probably do it after the service. I'll come and pick something and go, did you get anything out of the service today? It's pride, okay? And another way of showing such pride is that we do not give the authority to God that is God's authority. So when we're anxious, when we're under pressure, we hold on to that and we try and solve the problem ourselves. So one of the ways that we actually exhibit pride is in not giving our anxieties and our concerns and our worries to God. We imagine that we have some kind of control over our lives. We imagine that we have some kind of control over the future, and we hold on to it. We don't realize that that's pride, because usually at that point we feel like a victim. So we don't realize that we're really channeling pride. We might even feel that we're channeling humility. I couldn't possibly bother God with this. And yet Peter says to them, under this pressure that you're under, in this difficulty that you're experiencing, in this suffering that you're going through, hand over all of your anxiety to God, because he loves you, he cares for you. Humble yourselves. And so I want to ask you, what is it that you are holding on to that is really for God to solve? What is it that you are holding on to? What is it that you are trying to resolve? Or what is it even that you can't resolve, but that you imagine that by worrying about it, you will solve somehow in your head, at least? It's kind of magical, isn't it? I can't change this thing. In fact, nothing can change this thing, but I'm going to worry about it because somehow that might change the outcome. What is it that you hold on to? And is that something that you should hand over to God? Because only God can actually affect the future. Only God can actually deal with the struggle and the suffering that we are going through. Many of us are constantly anxious. And some of us are temporarily anxious because of difficulties that we're going through. But often what we share in that time is that we are trying to affect the outcome. And we imagine that our worrying about something, our anxiety about it, somehow will change the future. Peter says, don't. Hand over to God all your anxieties. This is an act of humility. Humble yourselves before God by recognizing you have no power over the future. Not really. Humble yourself before Him and allow Him to affect things. Allow Him to work out His plan. Somehow Peter thinks that the suffering that the church is going through, he thinks somehow this is within God's plan. We can't always understand that. It doesn't mean that the things that are happening are good, but somehow the struggle and the suffering that the church is going through is somehow something that God has allowed, has ordained maybe even, ultimately for their benefit. And so he says to them, humble yourself, hand over your anxieties, and wait, because in time He will lift you up. There's the promise. In time, He will lift you up. You may be struggling, you may be suffering, you may not understand why, but Peter says it's actually only going to be for a short time, and then God will lift you up. You cannot lift yourself up. Humble yourselves. Lower yourselves in this time of struggle, and in time, God will raise you up. It's amazing because it's remarkably similar to what Paul said. In Philippians, Paul said, though He was God, Christ was God, He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, He gave up His divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When He appeared in human form, He humbled Himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Come back. Put it back for a will you? Therefore, God elevated Him to the place of highest honor and gave Him the name above all other names, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth, under the earth, and every tongue declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. When we're asked to humble ourselves, then really what we're doing is imitating what Christ did. When we're asked to humble ourselves, we are doing only what He did. We are putting our lives in the Father's hands, and we are trusting that if we go a little lower for a while, then He will lift us up in time. But the point is, you cannot lift yourself up. There are so many situations of struggle, even if you got yourself in the hole you're in the first place. Even if it's your poor decisions, even if it's your sinfulness that got you in this place, even if you caused the trouble that you're experiencing, you cannot lift yourself back up. Humble yourself under God's mighty hand, and in time, just like He raised Jesus Christ, He will raise you out of suffering. The main reason for humility is not just to imitate Jesus. The main reason for humility is that who are we to imagine that we have control and power in this universe in the face of God? Who are we to imagine that we have authority here? Who are we to imagine that we can transform the universe? Do you realize that that pride is what got us into the problem in the first place? Think back to the beginning. They will be like God. The temptation was to be like God. That's what got us. And so when we imagine that we can affect and transform our futures, when we imagine that we can lift ourselves up, then really the pride, it's a primordial pride. It comes right back to the problem of our hearts, which is that we want to be like God. But Peter says, no, humble yourself. You may suffer for a little while, but God will lift you back up. God will solve this problem. Lastly, there's one bit where he doesn't talk about humility. There's one place where he doesn't say that we should lower ourselves. He says we should stand and resist. And that's in the face of the devil. We are to humble ourselves as leaders. We're to humble ourselves as a congregation. We're to humble ourselves before God. But we are to stand and resist when the devil is involved. And so when we are facing suffering, which is from the evil one, when we are facing great temptation, the early Christians were tempted to give up their faith completely, to give in to those who were persecuting them. The time that you are not to sit in humility, but to stand and resist is against Satan. It's against the evil one. We are to be, remember what he said a few weeks ago, be sober-minded and pray. Well, he says it again. He says, be sober-minded because you have an enemy who prowls around you, who wants to destroy you, who wants to destroy the gospel, who wants to destroy the church, who wants to destroy you. That's when you have to stand. Let's pray.